Then I want to introduce Anthony Pompliano. So why don't we, better known as Pomp. So he is somebody who I think has cracked the code on building online audiences as well as anybody I know right now. And the first time we met was in New York City. I was just starting a podcast. We met at a Starbucks on the East Side. And I was starting a podcast and I said, hey, how the hell do I do this? I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'd love your advice on what to do. So we sat down. We had a notebook. I remember flipping to like the 40th page. We had a notebook and we drew out the entire model of what the podcast was going to be. I thought he was helping me. Little did I know he was showing me exactly how he thought about audience building in just an amazing 1-hour session. And then we recorded a podcast a couple months ago. We said, oh my goodness, we have so many things in common. And I invited him here today to deliver this session on how to build an online audience. Welcome, Pomp.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm super excited about this.
Great. So I'm going to get the slides up for you now, and then we can sort of go through it at a similar speed. And let's see how this goes. So present. How does that look?
I can see it. I don't know if other people can, but looks good to me.
Thumbs up. All right. So how to build an audience and create content in 2020. Pomp, why don't you introduce yourself?
For sure. So Anthony Pompliano, most people just call me Pomp. I currently run a asset management firm with 2 other partners. We manage about $150 million. And through either luck, skill, or some combination, I've probably built one of the largest individual media companies in technology and finance. Previously did a whole bunch of other stuff, and we can get into kind of how the work at Facebook, Snapchat, et cetera, was super helpful in helping me understand how platforms work and how different growth models would work.
Fantastic.
And so what we've built so far, we've got a number of different platforms, a number of different kind of media assets, if you will. We do over 60 million impressions per month across those platforms. The business is highly profitable. We've never raised an outside dollar, and there's literally 3 people, including myself, that run this. So the big thing, I think, is that at this point, given the tools that are available in the platforms, you don't need a lot of people, and you can build incredible reach, audience, and monetization just using kind of the tools that every other person has available to them, and don't have to go work at a large technology company. So I'll just kind of go through the kind of more noteworthy things here. So Pomp Podcast, basically we do 5 interviews per week, top names, business, technology, finance. It started out under a different name called Off the Chain. It was very focused on Bitcoin and crypto, but we eventually went ahead and widened it out. I joke and say this is the most selfish thing I do because it's just based on my personal interest. It's a top 10 podcast in various categories, different countries, and does about 2.5 million downloads and views a month. That's across both the audio platforms and YouTube. And then I basically record all of the conversations, and then I've got one guy who helps me with some editing, and we basically split it up. So I edit probably about half the episodes. He edits the other half of them. The letter, I basically write a letter every weekday, send it out in the morning. One of them is free to anyone on the email list. 4 of them are behind a paywall, so you pay to get kind of 5 days a week. It's my personal opinion and analysis on business, tech, and finance. There's over 50,000 free subscribers, and I basically write this myself each morning. There's one section that I get somebody to help me on. My much more intelligent than me wife writes a little piece of it each morning, but for the most part, I put together the rest myself. And then Lunch Money is the latest thing that we've done. It's a daily show on YouTube. It's about 20 minutes or less. It essentially covers recent events and news across business, tech, finance, and culture. Does about 250,000 views per month. The show is only about, I'd say, 2 months old or so. And Pauline and I host it. And then we've got one person who helps on the editing, kind of post-recording to help get it uploaded. So I think that the kind of 3 things are podcast, the email, and then Lunch Money are really the show's media assets that we've built so far. And then it's all driven by Twitter. I've got over 330,000 followers, tens of millions of impressions per month. A single tweet can drive, thousands of clicks. And the way that I think about this is everything starts and ends with Twitter. It's really a traffic engine to all the other products and platforms. We can get into kind of why that is and how I built it. But I think that's the key to all of this is having that Twitter account is a huge advantage.
Yeah, so I just want to sort of pause here and let me just sort of share my model of what's happening. So basically, what I see is there is a constellation of stars rotating around a central orbit, which is Twitter. So it is both a constellation within different ways of actually sharing media and delivering that. So a podcast, video, newsletter, all that sort of stuff, and a different constellation of themes and people that he brings in. So what you could think about is what the podcast is doing is you could think of that as sort of at the furthest frontier of how I would see Pomp's life. People like Mark Cuban, investors like Chamath Palihapitiya, really high-level guests that kind of come into the ecosystem. Now, that then gets new people into the ecosystem, and they can join the Pomp letter, they can watch Pomp on video, they can read his writing, all that sort of stuff. And what we end up getting here is Twitter becomes that central hub, and it is the orbit that everything funnels into. And so what you're seeing here that I think is really interesting is you're seeing different ways, different languages, so to speak, of engaging with your audience. And that is the strategy behind this is what we're going to get into today.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, this whole thing, and David and I talked about this years ago, and I've been saying it for a long time. It's just audience is the new currency. And I'll get into kind of the timeline of how I built this. But really it was this single 5-word sentence drove it all. It was just this idea that those who build the audience have the power. And so I set out to do that back in 2017.
Those who build the audience have the power. I love that. Let's definitely explore that later on.
For sure. And so just from a timeline standpoint, I think part of this is people see this and like, oh, I'm going to go do this tomorrow. I've been doing this for a while. So in Twitter, in early 2017, literally Polina had more followers than I had. I think I had like 2,000 followers on Twitter, hadn't really used it that much. And I decided that was the platform where I was going to build the audience first. I thought it was the easiest one to kind of hack and really grow. Grew it in 2017 to 100,000 users or followers. And then in May of 18, so about kind of just under 18 months after I started on Twitter, I then started Substack. I was one of their first users there. I wrote pretty much every single day until August 2018 when I launched the podcast. And then it waited all the way until January of this year before I really started focusing on YouTube. And so we can get into kind of the logic behind this timeline, but you can see that, it's not something where I went and did everything all at once. It was very kind of sequential and somewhat intentional. And I kind of explain why I did it that way. Yeah. How can you do this? I'm assuming that's why you guys are all here. Best piece of advice, don't try it. It sucks, to be completely honest. I'll kind of elaborate on this later, but essentially this is really, really hard. And I literally put this in here to remind myself, like, it's very easy to have kind of hindsight bias and be like, oh yeah, I just did this, this, and this. And then like, it just happened. But what you end up realizing is it's actually taken a lot of time, a lot of effort. I've probably done a lot of things that most people, one, are unwilling to do, or two, are very unscalable. And so I think that you've got to have one understanding of like, why do I want to go do this? Like, what is the value that I'm trying to create? Two, what is the end result that I'm looking for? Like, what does success look like? And then the third thing is you got to have like an honest conversation with yourself just around, do I have the time and energy and really the dedication to attempt this? And what I tell people is if you can talk yourself out of doing it before you even start, like, you never would have been successful with it anyways, because it really is going to come down to just man hours and time, which obviously I've been blessed to be able to dedicate to it. But some people just, for whatever reason, they just can't do that. And so speaking of that, I've put together 6 principles in this deck that I'll go over kind of one by one. David and I can talk about. And then at the end, there's a number of actionable tips for each platform that are more tactical and exactly what you can do to grow those platforms. But by far, when I sat down and thought about like, what is the number one principle when thinking of all of this, it's just that persistence wins. And what I mean by that is if you think that you're going to launch any platform and build an audience from 0 to, 1,000 users, 10,000, 100,000, it just doesn't happen that way. Like literally, I could tell you, if you take YouTube, for example, when we got started, we were getting like 5 subscribers a day. And I was so frustrated. And then all of a sudden we were getting 100 and then 500. And then there was days where we'd get 2,000 subscribers in a day. And you start to remember, you think like it's easy, right? And then all of a sudden it tapers off and then you're back down to getting 500, 300, 100 subscribers per day. And you just got to remember that like the grind of this and the persistence, it just takes time. And so that's not only true for me. I think if you look at somebody like, a Mr. Beast or a David Dobrik, like even people who have these really, really big kind of tens of millions of people, like I think it's Mr. Beast has been uploading videos to YouTube since 2013. Right. And so he's literally been doing it for 7 years. Like no wonder he's good at it. Right. And so I think the same thing here is when I talk about a lot of this stuff, it's just I've been doing it for a long time at this point, and I've actually tried all the things that didn't work and was just persistent enough to continue. And so, as you keep in mind that it's going to take time, it also helps you mentally kind of continue because you're just saying, look, of course it's going to take a while. You don't get frustrated when all of a sudden you don't get thousands or tens of thousands of followers or audience or subscribers. And so the second principle, and this is, I think, the biggest divergence that I've had from kind of the mainstream thinking is I just sum it up as productize yourself. So I literally look at the hours in my day. If we go to, let's say this past Tuesday is a great example. On Tuesday alone of this week, I wrote a newsletter that I sent out to a bunch of people. I then recorded Lunch Money, which is the YouTube show. I then did a live stream for somebody else's YouTube for an hour. And then I recorded 3 podcasts. And so if you think about that, I basically recorded 5 different video and audio assets and also wrote the email all in a single day. And so that level of kind of effort, one, just most people don't have the capacity of work like that. So I know that that is an advantage I have and I try to lean into that. But the second thing is the reason why I'm willing to do it is I basically break up my day and I say every hour is something I can dedicate to a different product. So it takes me about 1 hour to write the email every day. It takes me about 30 minutes to record Lunch Money every day. It takes me about an hour to record a podcast. And I literally just break up my day. And then what I try to do is optimize every single hour. How am I dedicating time to the production of a asset that then can be monetized later on? And so when you think of it as a product standpoint, the quote unquote investment you are making, right? I never raised money for this. Frankly, I've sunk very little capital into it at all. It was really just the kind of time and effort of myself and a few other people. It was, how are you going to spend your time, right? Just like a business thinks of investing dollars and what is the output of that. Here, what I thought about was as I invest my time, what is the output? And what I basically want to do is I want to optimize for every hour invested, the most amount of content that I can create. And that's what I've done in kind of this idea of productizing yourself or productizing your idea is an important principle.
I have a question. I would just want to jump in here. How do you think of the leverage on your time? So a word that we use internally is return on attention. So in finance, people talk about return on your investment. For every dollar that you put in, what kind of return are you going to get on that? So the stock market will yield some kind of return, maybe at around 7%. The bond market might be down around 2%. And obviously that fluctuates with interest rates and stuff like that. But then when it comes to return on attention, you are investing that same kind of time and giving your attention to a certain kind of product. So when you're thinking about how am I going to invest my time, sort of implied within what you're saying is I'm going to create as much as possible. Why was creating as much as possible your strategy rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to write 4 books a year. I'm going to write 16 long form essays. Why is it that you've gone for being prolific?
Yeah. So I think that, and it's one of the other principles here, like there's 2 paths you can pursue. You can either put a bunch of time and attention into the highest quality, low frequency type content, which is basically what you're talking about. Or you can go the opposite end, which is you can go to high frequency, good enough quality. right? And the reason why I optimize for that is I previously ran the growth team for Facebook pages. And so I got kind of an inside look at how a lot of these algorithms work. And if you think of, let's take Facebook's news feed, for example, if you and 100 other businesses are competing for the 7 to 12 commercial content slots every time the news feed is refreshed, if that algorithm only has one piece of content from you to put into one of those slots, and every other business created one piece of content. Let's say there's 100 businesses, you have a 1 out of 100 chance of being included in those 7 to 12 slots. If instead you have created 10 pieces of content and everyone else has created one, you now have basically a 1 in 109, or I'm sorry, you have a 10 out of 100 chance of being included. And so it isn't broken down by the number of people competing or the number of organizations. It's actually the algorithms are optimizing for the number of pieces of content. And so the more content you give the algorithm, the more supply it has to choose from. You have a higher odds of being included in the newsletter or in the news feeds and in the algorithms. And so that was a very conscious decision because I understood how those social media algorithms worked, that I said, I can't predict it, right? I mean, anyone who creates content on the internet will tell you, I kind of sort of know what's going to take off. But I've done interviews where I thought that they were grand slams and they absolutely kind of flop. And then I've done ones that I would have thought they were going to flop, and next thing you know, they explode. And so there's not as much ability to kind of predict some of this. And so instead of trying to be perfect, it's, look, let's get as many shots on goal as we can, as long as it meets some quality barrier, right? You don't want to just throw kind of garbage at the wall, but you want to meet some kind of quality bar, and then as much of that as you can. And it gives you the best opportunity to go viral, create audience, get in front of people, things like that.
Let's talk about focusing on one platform at a time. Principle number 3.
Yeah. So this is basically how I built, this is probably the number one thing that I did that a lot of people do the opposite, right? So literally I started on Twitter in 2017. I did the newsletter. I literally waited almost 18 months before I ever went to a different platform, which was Substack. And the reason why I did it was actually out of fear of losing the first platform. So I literally made a conscious effort. I said, if I ever lost a Twitter account for whatever reason, if Twitter, blew up tomorrow, I wouldn't have any other platform. And so I started to use Twitter to drive traffic to the newsletter. As I built that up, I then realized, okay, I should build out another platform, which was the podcast. And so for a good year and a half almost, I only did Twitter. Then I started the newsletter. And then once I had the podcast, I basically paused, right? And I just did the newsletter, the podcast, and the email for 18 months. I didn't go to another platform. I didn't start a TikTok or, chase the latest, greatest thing. I didn't even really use Instagram or any of that stuff. It was just, those are my 3 platforms, and I'm going to just do it until I feel really comfortable that in my sleep I could create content and grow on these platforms. And then and only then did I then say, okay, what's the 4th platform? We chose YouTube, and then we started to go there. And so this idea of kind of focusing on one platform at a time has 2 main benefits. The first is focus. So you literally can focus on, how do I win on this platform? How do I become successful here? But the second thing that it does is, if you are able to grow the first platform, it helps you accelerate the growth of the second platform. Then once you have the second platform in a spot where you've built an audience and there's high engagement and all the things you want to see, then when you go to build the third one, you almost get the benefit of the first and second platform, right? Because you can push people from those platforms to your third platform and things like that. I think what a lot of people do is they go out and they say, hey, I need a Facebook, I need an Instagram, I need a TikTok, I need a YouTube, I need all this stuff. They end up doing none of them well, 1. And then 2 is they've got a little bit of following on each individual one of them, but it's not enough to actually help build up any sort of like real momentum. So you end up getting 100 followers on 5 different platforms. Well, it'd be much better if you could get 500 followers on one platform and focus all your time and energy of going from 500 to 5,000, rather than trying to take all of the 5 platforms with 100 followers and say, hey, how do I go from 100 to 1,000 on all these different platforms?
This is exactly right. So one time, I've never told this story in public before. I had one-on-one with Gary Vaynerchuk, and we were thinking of co-writing an essay together, and they just launched this product called Vayner Commerce, and I was going to go be a part to basically be the marketing arm of the team. This was before I started Write a Passage. And I went in on President's Day of, I think, 2018. So it was a day off, and nobody was in the office. So Gary is sitting there. But outside, even though none of the people in the ad agency were there, none of the accountants, no one on the finance team was there, but there were 15 people there. And what were those 15 people there doing? They were all part of Gary's team. And so my point here is in saying, when you look at a lot of the big names who you say, I want to be that person, whether it's Gary Vaynerchuk or all these other people with big audiences, generally, and Pomp is an exception here. He has one full-time person who works for him, but Gary has like a team of 15 or 20 people who were there even on the holiday. And I never forgot that, because it made me realize that a lot of what these people are saying is made possible by having a lot of labor that's working for them at all time. And if you don't have that, I don't have that. I have just Becca. It's two of us. And if you don't have that, what you want to do is focus on one platform. And this is a way that you should ignore the social media managers who are working for big brands and ignore the big influencers.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to that, it's kind of like working out, right? Like if you want to go bench press 250 pounds, you kind of start out with just the bar, right? And you get comfortable lifting the bar. Then you say, okay, I'm going to add 10s to each side. Then I'm going to add 20 pounds, then 30 pounds and 50 pounds. And you kind of build the muscle memory and the strength really to kind of continue to move on. But only after some period of time that you say, okay, you know what, I can bench press. If you've never lifted before, once you understand bench pressing, you then can move on to more complex things, right? And so I think it's very similar here of you got to build the muscle memory. And so if you had told me in the beginning, hey, you're going to write a letter, you're going to record a YouTube show, and you're going to record podcast episodes all in the same day, I would have stopped. I'd have been like, there's no way. I literally don't have the time, energy. Like this is overwhelming. But once you get into the kind of the flow of it and you build the muscle memory and you realize like, oh, I can actually write the news. I literally wake up, I have no clue what I'm going to write about, and I can bang it out in 60 minutes. Right. And that's just because I've done it so many times now. I've figured out the hacks in my head and know how to structure and all that kind of stuff. That then opened up the possibility where it used to take me 2 hours. Well, now I can spend an hour on the letter, and then I've got this new hour open in my day. Why don't we go ahead and record the podcast, or why don't we do a YouTube show or whatever? And you just begin to optimize your day. But doing it from the start, I think is just a recipe for disaster.
And to further the working out metaphor, Arnold Schwarzenegger was once asked, what is the key to getting ripped? And he gave a 3-word answer: reps, reps, reps. So let's move on to number 4. More content is better than less. What a perfect transition.
Yeah. So we already talked about this a little bit. Basically, the whole idea is most people will, they get super nervous. They're like, oh, I already tweeted twice today. Right. So a lot of people always ask me like, how did I grow Twitter? Right. That was the whole key. And there was 2 things I did. The first was I made sure that every single person I could find that possibly could be interested in the content knew that I was there. And the second thing was I tweeted literally until I couldn't think of anything else to tweet anymore. And so the 2 things that end up happening is I knew that, okay, you just overwhelm the algorithm and you will grow, right? And so I said, well, how do I do that again by meeting that quality bar? And so in 2017, I didn't have tons of opinions. I wasn't super kind of comfortable just being myself yet. And so instead what I did is every hour on the hour, I would go to a bunch of media organizations. I would refresh the page and I would take a story that was that they had published. And I basically would read it, pull out some insight, and then go ahead and tweet it. And so I was doing this every hour, and I was tweeting like 10, 15 times a day, but it was all, I was using other people in terms of their ideas, their articles, like that type of stuff to give me content. Cause I didn't yet have the muscle memory of like, how do you come up with 10 tweets a day? Right. And so by doing that, what I ended up doing was, 1, I got a lot of feedback in terms of what types of tweets work, what types of tweets don't work. 2 is I was constantly putting content out there, and it was increasing the possibility that people would come across the content in my profile. And the 3rd was it was like a magnet for people who liked the things that I was saying or talking about. Naturally, as they found it, would want to follow, they would want to stay engaged and things like that. And so to me, the whole idea of like more content is better than less, that worked on Twitter. It definitely works on the email. I could say, hey, I'm only going to write 1 email a week. But if I say I'm going to write 5 a week, that's better than writing just 1, as long as I, again, meet some level of a quality bar that people find acceptable. Podcast. I started out, I was doing, I think 2 a week. Then I went to 3 a week. Now I do 5 a week. Well, why do I do 5 a week? It's because 1, I can do it in terms of I have the capacity of work to do it. But also 2 is most people, if you think about your consumer behavior, I go to, let's say, a Joe Rogan's podcast, right? And I want to listen to an episode. I may see 3 episodes there since the last time I checked, but I only want to listen to 1 of them. So people get in this kind of muscle memory of like, oh, I want to give people enough time to listen to it. Like, no, actually, it's like Netflix. I want to dump as much content on your lap as I can, and you choose what you want to listen to, because I guarantee you don't want to listen to it all, right? Instead, I'll just give you as much as possible and give you choice. And so by doing that, what you do is you actually end up drastically increasing the potential addressable market, if you will, of your audience, because now you can just create more content. More content leads to more people being interested. More people being interested leads to larger followers, audience, etc.
There's a website called Marginal Revolution that's run by two guys named one Tyler Cowen and another Alex Tabarrok. And they are both in the George Mason economics department. And the site does a couple million views a month. And there are 4 or 5 posts a day. And what's really interesting about that volume of content is it is the only site that I actually go visit, almost like I would visit a Twitter feed to say, what is new here today? And what's interesting is when you are cranking out content at a consistent pace, you get this kind of Pavlovian excitement of you check out the feed and you can say, what's new today? Whereas something that's just once a week or every other week, it doesn't have that element of surprise. So let's talk about the next principle: create once, publish 5 times.
Yeah, this is the secret. If you think of a podcast, I'm able to record via Zoom, audio and video. I then take the audio and I publish it as a podcast. I take the video and I publish it on YouTube. I then cut up the long form interview into highlights, so I get multiple videos for YouTube out of it. I then take both the audio link and the video link and I put it into the email in a section that is highlighting the podcast. And then I will tweet out the links to the podcast, the video, sometimes even the highlights, etc. And so off the one action of recording a podcast episode, I've now created, I used, create once, publish 5 times as just a general rule, but I've actually created like 8 to 10 pieces of content off of that 1 hour of my time. And so that is a mechanism or a framework that should exist across the board, right? If you think about when I write the email, I do the same thing. When I actually am tweeting even, I'll do the same thing. You see a lot of people now, they'll tweet, then they'll take the tweet and they'll post it on Instagram, right? That's some version of that. Is you basically want to very much streamline the content creation thought process or process you go through. And then what you want to do is you want to expand the amount of ways that you can use that piece of content on all the various platforms. So for me, that 1 hour investment to record a podcast episode with somebody ends up creating so much content that people are literally like, how do you create all this content? Well, it's 1 hour of my time that then turns into all this other stuff. What helps in that is a very, very set process and kind of organizational, kind of really strict ethos around when we record a podcast, here's exactly what we're going to do with it. And then you just get the repetitions in, right? You just literally over and over and over again, and you quickly learn the things that work, the things that don't work. But this principle has proven its worth in gold for sure.
One of the things that I would just say here, so this exists on a spectrum. So let's take this in context of focus on one platform when you are starting. So what we talked about just now of podcast, YouTube channel, that's something that you want to build towards. So say that you are starting out, you're on blog post number 20, and what could you do? Well, here's an idea. You could publish the post, then you could publish a podcast of either you reading the post or what went behind the post. You could publish a YouTube video of how you actually created the post or you talking about it. And then you could publish a TweetStorm summary of what exactly you learned in the post. Right there, that's 4. So look, you don't need Pomp's resources and years of experience in order to do this. What I just said, all of you, every single one, no excuses, can do that. Let's talk about the next one. You owe the audience everything.
This is how I beat everybody. Straight up. There's very few people in the world that are willing to spend hours of their day talking to anonymous people on the internet. And for the last 3+ years, I have spent literally multiple hours a day responding to every single person on Twitter, responding to all of the YouTube comments, every single email that somebody responds to for the email, like literally just obsessing over the audience is the boss. it sucks. Like there's days where I'm like, I don't want to go answer these people that I don't know or reply. But what you quickly learn again is you understand how you can rip through, 150 YouTube comments. I can do it in 20 minutes or less. How do I do that? Like I've got a number of things that I know are kind of safe comments. So, hey, thanks for watching today. I really appreciate you subscribing, like that type of stuff. The use of emojis is always awesome. Somebody says something nice, send them the praying hands emoji, all that kind of stuff. And then every once in a while you respond in like a super customized way. Somebody asks a question or whatever. And what you begin to realize is what you're really doing is you're telling the audience like, hey, I'm paying attention. You're just as important as I am in this whole thing. And they start to feel like they're involved in it. And so imagine if every time that you go and you tweet at somebody, they respond. Or if every time you write on a YouTube comment, that person responds. You, of course, are going to come back, right? You're going to watch their next thing. You're going to leave a comment and you begin to become emotionally invested in that content. At some point, it becomes unscalable. I'm probably at that point now where I can't respond to every single thing. So I've started to try to come up with certain hacks on, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll respond to 80% of the YouTube comments and do the things that are ranked the highest, right? And then at the very end, the last 5 I'm going to answer, I'll actually scroll down to the very bottom to the things that got absolutely 0 engagement, and I'll respond to them. Right. And they kind of feel like, holy shit, I can't believe he went and responded to that. And so like by doing this over and over and over again and remembering like the audience is the reason why you have the influence, why you're able to monetize, why you're able to do all this, it just keeps you focused on what's actually important. And what I'll kind of leave with you is for those who haven't seen it yet, I highly suggest going and watching. There's a documentary with Garth Brooks. So Garth Brooks is the best-selling solo musician of all time. The documentary recently got posted on Netflix. And when you watch this, it's a 2-part series, about 2.5 hours. It's really, really interesting to me how every single person says the same thing. He literally, back in the early 90s or late 80s, would stay after playing some honky tonk, bar. He would stay for hours and autograph every single fan that wanted an autograph. Till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, he would stay and he would literally give every single person an autograph. He'd shake every single person's hand. And he did that for years and years and years, literally for more than a decade. And he ended up being the best selling artist of all time. And so you don't have to be perfect, right? It's fine if you miss a day or whatever, but that general principle of saying the audience is the reason why I'm here, I think a lot of people overlook that. But to me, it's probably the biggest differentiator. One, because you're investing your time. A lot of people aren't willing to make the time investment, but also 2, what you find is you understand what content works and what doesn't. Like if I create a piece of content, the audience hates it, by reading the comments and responding to them, I learn. And so I just look at it as this very circular thing, but keeping this in mind, I think is enough people don't talk about it. And also 2, enough people don't have the kind of the dedication and energy to actually spend, engaging with every single person in the audience.
I think that there's a really deep idea here around listening to your audience and that your relationship with your audience is a dance. So what a lot of people do is they err on 2 sides. The first side that they err on is, I am going to publish what I want and I don't care what anybody else thinks. This is my vision and I deserve to have it in the world. The other side of this is I'm just going to do what's popular, and whatever gets the most engagement, I'm going to do more of it. And you need some kind of synthesis between the two. You want your vision, but you also want to be listening to what are people responding to? What are they engaging with? What surprises them? What are they coming back for? And Pomp, I'm curious to hear how you think about those 2 things. And as you think about it, I have a story. So my favorite band, it's called Above and Beyond, and they are now going and releasing all these old sets. And so they're sort of going back and I was just listening to a set that they played in Hungary in 2011. And right at the beginning, the guy at there's 3 guys in the band. One of them, his name is Tony. And he said that this set, what they were doing is they were road testing for their upcoming album, Group Therapy. And what road testing is testing in live concert, how are people responding to new songs before you put them into an album? And it's the same idea that we use in Write a Passage, something called the triangle, where I distinguish between what I call the Thoreau model, right? Where the mid 19th century, Henry David Thoreau goes to Walden Pond and he escapes society for 2 years and he doesn't see any person. And then he comes back with Walden, this famous book, and he says, "This is what I delivered after spending 2 years in solitude without talking to anybody." And that doesn't really work anymore, nor is it even advantageous. What's better is to go from a tweet, this tweet got a surprising amount of engagement. Maybe that tweet came from a conversation, something that you said that somebody else was interesting, or vice versa. Then you go from that to a blog post, from a blog post to a podcast, from a podcast to a YouTube video. And now what you're doing is you're dancing with your audience, getting feedback at every single step. So my question for you, Pomp, is how do you think about that dance with your audience? How do you think about the waiting on I'm going to do what I want versus I'm just going to give my audience what they're engaging with?
Yeah. So this all comes down to authenticity, right? And very early on, I knew that there's going to be a day where I just stop. Like I'll wake up one day and just be like, all right, that's it. I'm done. And I'll literally never create another piece of content. Right. And because I knew that, I said to myself, I want to do this my way. Right. And my way was, I want to learn. I want to write about the things I want to write about. I want to talk to the people I want to talk about, all that kind of stuff. Those are things that I kind of put in the, I'm not willing to compromise. So if somebody says, hey, I don't like that guest, I don't care. Right. If somebody says, I don't like that you wrote about that, I don't care. But if somebody says to me, hey, the audio quality sucks, we'll improve that. Right. Thanks for the feedback. And so it's like, I'm not willing to compromise on the really big things because again, at the end of the day, like I'm optimizing for doing the things I want to do. Like that's why I have, I think the energy to do all of this is because I'm enjoying it. Right. I don't look at it as work. It's fun and I'm learning. And frankly, I can't believe that I can do it. But there's a ton of little things that are all of the kind of improvements, the minutia. That's where I listen really, really intently. Right. So if I said, I'm actually more open to somebody saying, hey, I didn't like when you said that one sentence, right? Or I think you misspoke here. That's much more, or I'm more receptive to that than if somebody says, I don't like that guest, right? And it's because the details is where I think the audience can give you the best feedback. The big picture stuff, like the audience actually probably isn't best suited to do that. Right. It's very personal, preference driven, all that kind of stuff. And so I think that it's not so black and white of like, do you listen to the audience? Do you not? I think it's like, where in the stack of the content creation do you listen? And how do you put weight on certain things and much less weight on others?
That's a great answer. Let's get into some of the actionable ideas and we'll go platform by platform together. And I will sprinkle in some color from my own experience as well. But let's start with Twitter. What should we be focused on in terms of very actionable things?
Yeah. So I'll caveat all this with like, this is what's worked for me. Everyone's different, but create more content than you think possible. And I always tell people 10 plus tweets a day, because I think 10 tweets, when they hear that, they're like, there's no way I could create 10 tweets. It's like, if you think you're creating a lot of content, double it. Right. And you probably still aren't creating enough. Use spacing and punctuation. So very early on, it became obvious to me, like people were tweeting this like block of content, right? It was just like a run-on sentence basically with some like sporadic periods in between it. But it's really hard to read. And so you have to remember, like, you're creating content for other people. So using spacing, using punctuation, like making it easier to read makes it so that they're more likely to actually ingest the information and much more likely to actually engage with it. So things like lists increase virality. Because what it essentially does is it's super clear. Here's exactly what I'm saying. Bang, bang, bang. Here's bullet points and like some call to action. People are likely to retweet that, favorite it, engage with it, whatever. It's very digestible. Links are the exact opposite. I literally have to click a link to then get the information, right? So not only one, is it a weird consumption model for me to have to click the link to then get the information, there's friction there, but also two is you have to remember what the social platforms incentives are. They want people to stay on Twitter or Facebook or whatever platform. They do not want you to send people elsewhere. So they will actually not give as much reach to tweets, for example, that have links in them, because what you're doing is you're promoting them leaving the platform. And so understanding that and realizing, well, if I don't actually put the link in the first tweet, if instead I put the content and then put the link later, that type of stuff can help you. Hijacking viral tweets or large accounts. I was doing this for a while, and then eventually I think people were getting a little annoyed with it. But what I essentially did, the best one was I turned on tweet notifications for Donald Trump. Every single time Donald Trump tweets, he gets hundreds of thousands of favorites. He gets thousands and tens of thousands of replies, and the tweets get millions of impressions. And so every single time he would tweet, I'd get a push notification. I would literally race to respond as fast as I possibly could so that I was one of the first responses, and I would do something that I thought would get a lot of engagement. And therefore, when people were scrolling through the replies, they would see, oh, what is this account? They'd click on it. They would look at it. Some people would follow me, whatever. And so by doing that, by hijacking these viral tweets or large accounts, what you're doing is you're basically using them to do the marketing for you, right? They're driving impressions. You're siphoning some of those impressions off into your own little world. So Donald Trump, Kanye West, a bunch of these folks I did it for a while, even to the point of sometimes I would literally respond to Trump and be like, hey, Trump, if you want to learn about Bitcoin, go subscribe to this email, right? And it was quote unquote directed at Trump. But what I really was hoping for was people who were responding to the replies were like, well, I don't know if Trump wants to learn about that stuff, but I do. Let me go and actually sign up for this email list. And so little things like that, I think, help. Replying to everyone we already talked about. DMs are the real LinkedIn. This couldn't be more true. I have met more people on Twitter than anywhere else in my personal and professional life. And people are just super responsive, right? Like there's very few people you see on Twitter that have somebody else running their Twitter account for them. It is them who are actually there reading everything, engaging, etc. And so if you're able to DM with them, you get the real person, and it's a way to kind of cut through the noise. Setting up your profile for success. Where do you want people to go? Put the link in your profile. Write it out in a way that tells people, here's who I am, here's the type of content you're going to get. I think people just kind of overlook that. But for me, if I get, tens of millions of impressions on my Twitter account, I may get hundreds of thousands of impressions on the profile itself. That's just free traffic. So make sure it's set up to send people where you want to send them. And then a good gift is worth 1,000 favorites. Look, Twitter is very text heavy, but I think that as society has kind of evolved, all sorts of multimedia type content is doing very well on Twitter specifically. So don't be afraid to kind of use some of that stuff to your advantage as well.
Quick comment on links. If you do share a link, what you want to do is you want to basically take out as much of the relevant information as possible. So for example, say that Apple just launched a new iPhone. What you want to do, rather than sharing CNBC, Apple launches new iPhone, actually link to, in a list, the top 3 things that you learned from the article so that somebody can still get value from your tweet and like it and want to share it with somebody without reading the article. If you can actually summarize things for people, save them time, compress information in different ways, you can still share a link and get a lot more boosting. But I think that the general principle within that is very helpful for Twitter. People want to learn. People are curious. The thing that people don't want to do is they don't want to spend a lot of time on things, not because they're lazy, but because they're busy and because there's so much stuff out there, and people don't want to read things that are incredibly complicated to parse and difficult. And the fact of the matter is, the more I've written, the more I've realized that it's just true. The complexity of something does not mean that it inherently has more information content. Sometimes that's true, but this is a really weird correlation that comes from academia. And if you can actually save people time, make things easy for people, not because they're stupid, but because they are busy and because they want to learn, you can do really well on Twitter and all of these platforms. So let's move on to email. What have you learned about email?
Consistency wins. So people will subscribe expecting something. Don't miss. Literally, if you say you're going to do it daily, do it daily. If you want to do it weekly, do it weekly. Just don't miss. The other thing is, if you're going to do a paid email like Substack, most people will focus on how do I grow the paid subscribers, because that's where the money is. It's actually the wrong way to look at it. Instead, you want to grow the free list. And then once they're on the free list, then work on converting them to paid. This idea of most people, they don't just show up to the store and start buying things. They've actually been conditioned over time. They walked in the store. That was step 1. You got to get them in the store. Once you get them in the store, you got to get them comfortable with whatever you want the product to be. Get them to try it on, right? Kind of walk them through breadcrumbs to become a paying member. So building that free list is very, very important. And the way you do that is by giving more than you take. Right. And so give as much value as you can, because ultimately what you're doing is you're asking for the permission to penetrate their inbox. right? And I say it very specifically like that. People do not like more email in most cases, and you are going to violate that space. So you better damn be sure that you're giving them some sort of value in their inbox, or they're going to kick you out of it, right? And so that's a really important component of this. Don't be afraid to ask people to subscribe, whether it's on social platforms or if, let's say, they're on your free list, you want them to pay. You have to be shameless when it comes to it, not in kind of a super snaky, oil salesman type way, but instead in, hey, here is what I'm doing. I'm putting a lot of time, effort, and into kind of creating this. I would like you to do X in order to receive it, subscribe, pay, whatever it is. Don't be shy, right? Know what you are worth. And I think a lot of people kind of downplay that. Another thing is find like-minded audiences. Basically, if you can find other audiences that you think will like what you have, figure out how to work with the people who run those audiences. So whether that's link swaps in their emails, whether that's to go on and do live streams or whatever it is, finding like-minded audiences and telling them, hey, if you like X, you'll definitely like this thing Y that I'm doing, is a great way to grow. Identifying inflection points are really important. So for me, for example, I have a pretty good sense when I know a post on the letter is going to get or be received well. And so rather than wait till I publish it and then go promote it, I will promote it in advance. I will say, hey, on Monday, I'm writing something about A, B, and C. If you want to read it, make sure you subscribe. And then a bunch of people subscribe beforehand. I then publish it. And then after I publish it, I say, hey, I wrote something about ABC. If you want to read it, subscribe so you get more like this. And so understanding those kind of inflection points and being willing to promote them in advance is really important, because if you're willing to promote it after the fact, you should be willing to promote it in advance as well. Use the email as a distribution point. That and this idea of passive links pay off are kind of simultaneous. What I mean by that is in the email that I write every morning, I write a analysis or opinion at the top. I then put a bunch of links to recent news articles, and the bottom half of the email is just distribution for everything else. So you'll see the podcast episode of the day there. You'll see the YouTube episode. You'll see a link to all the sponsors, like all that kind of stuff. I literally copy and paste it. It's a structure or a template, and I just fill in the template for the day. And then I include it at the bottom of the email. But out of the 50,000 people who are getting this thing, some percentage of them will continue to scroll down to the bottom. They'll look at this stuff. They'll click through. They'll kind of go explore. And so you want to use the opportunity. You're going into their inbox, give them as much value as possible, and use that email as a distribution point for all the other content. And then I wrote upsell, upsell, upsell here. And what I mean by that is you always want to be delivering value, but also asking the audience to help you in some way. So whether that's, hey, pay, hey, will you forward this to people? Hey, will you tweet about this? Will you share it? Will you go and look at the other content we're creating, right? If you are actually delivering value, you are doing the audience a favor by showing them other great content as well, or asking them to help promote it to other people. If you do not create good content, it won't matter. They'll just think that you're kind of a snake oil salesman and they won't care. So I think that what you've got to do is this upsell ideas. You want to upsell them into content that is valuable for them. You're continuing to provide more value. You're showing them where to go. And you just got to not be scared to do that.
Let's talk about YouTube.
This was the hardest one. YouTube was the hardest to crack. I think that first to start with, you got to have the YouTube banner. You want it to explain what are you going to cover and how often. So if you look at ours, it says, daily videos on technology and finance or something, right? And then there's an arrow pointing to go subscribe. So that kind of knocks out the first 2 points here. It's just being right when somebody lands on kind of the landing page of your YouTube, you want them to know, here is what this is about, and go subscribe. And so you're making an ask and telling them what to expect. 2, create more videos, same as other platforms, more content is better. You want to optimize the video title, description, and thumbnail. This is really important. YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world, right? A lot of people forget that. YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. And therefore you want to treat your content the same way you would treat SEO in the traditional sense on just through Google. So the video title, what are people going to be searching for? Don't write some super obscure title. Look in Google Trends and understand what are people searching for and incorporate that into the title, the description, even the text in the thumbnail. All of those things will give you a better opportunity to actually show up in the search results. The description, same thing like the email, using that as a distribution point in the email. You also want to use passive links in the description. So if you go into many of the best content creators and scroll down in the description, you'll see they link to all their social platforms. They link to the emails. They link to all the different things that they have, because they know some portion of the tens of or hundreds of thousands of people who watch this video are going to go look in the description, and they are going to scroll down to the 17th link. And if they're interested, they'll click. But put it there. Don't not use the distribution you already have. And that gets into this pin the comment. This is the single best thing you can do on YouTube if you want to promote other things. So on every single YouTube interview video that we post, I pin a comment that says, Pomp writes a daily letter to these types of people. You should go subscribe. Here's the link. And so if you're watching the video and you scroll into the comment sections, the very first comment you see is a link to go subscribe to the email so that you can get more content like this. And that's been a great growth driver for us. So whatever the thing is you're optimizing for, pin it as a comment at the top of the comments to every single video. Also, you can create an outro with each video. So let's say you do an interview and then you say, all right, thanks so much, end of interview. You can actually cut in another video of you saying, hey guys, thanks so much for watching the video. I hope you guys really enjoyed that one. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you get more content like this, and leave a comment and I'll do my best to respond. That 15 to 20 second quote unquote outro reminds people, hey, one, I'm thanking you for watching the whole video, right? That helps with YouTube's algorithm in terms of recommending it to more people. Two, I'm telling you specifically at the end of the video, right at that emotional point where you are thankful that you got to watch this content, go subscribe. Three, leave a comment, right? I'm telling you all the things to do in the audience. That 15-second outro can just be a clip that's pre-recorded and you drop at the end of every single video before you upload it. So it's kind of, again, you're streamlining the content creation process, but you're getting maximum impact for recording a one-time 15-second outro. Use search trends to your advantage, no brainer. And then leverage guests with large audiences, right? I mean, this is kind of a no brainer as well, but basically if you bring people on who have big audiences and they share your content, you're more likely to get more views on that content. So don't be scared to reach out to people with big audiences and say, hey, I want to bring you on my channel or bring you on my podcast or write about you in my email, whatever. And can you then share it once it's created?
Before we get into podcasts, I have a quick question for you. How do you think about the trade-off between walled garden content and open content? So open content is good because with writing, this is where the trade-off happens the most. With the Pomp letter, I believe you publish 4 exclusive ones and then 1 public one a week. Why did you settle on the 4-1 split? Because certainly if you had 5 open ones, the writing would spread to more people, but then you'd have less of a demand for subscription. Whereas if you had 5 and you didn't have a public one every week, then you could have more subscription, but you'd give up in marketing. How do you think about that trade-off?
Well, in hindsight, I look smart, but honestly, the way that I thought of it the first time was Ben Thompson did 1 for free and 3 behind a paywall. And I was like, well, if it's good enough for Ben, then it's good enough for me. And so I figured that he had done a lot more kind of intellectual thinking about, or critical thinking about why he did that. And I said, look, he's been doing it for years, so why don't I just benefit from all the work he's done? But in hindsight, the key was people want to pay for the exclusive content, right? So having the 4 behind the paywall helps, but you still need some sort of public growth, right, or engine. And so being able to show people, hey, if you are a subscriber on the email, this is what you'll get. That gets them onto the free list. And then once they're on the free list, I can then say to them, hey, you should go ahead and subscribe to the paid one so that you get the same email 5 times a week rather than just the one time you're getting it now, right? And so you're basically kind of proving your value before you actually ask them to pay.
What have you learned about delivering to subscribers and what subscribers want? What has made you settle on the equilibrium of focusing on emails? What has made you not focus maybe more on personal Q&As and other things like that, live meetups? Like, how do you think about what is a subscriber paying for? What do they want? And how do I give that to them?
It's all around optimization of my time. So I can, one of the issues with a podcast that's interview style is I have to rely on other people. So I got to find the people. I've got to get them to agree to do the podcast. I've got to make sure they've got good audio, good video, all that kind of stuff. And then I've got to schedule the time, right? Then I've got to get it recorded, edited, whatever. With the email, I wake up, I spend 1 hour. It's just me. That's all I have to rely on. I write what I want to write, I publish it, and I move on. I don't think about it again until the next day. And so when you think of it in that sense, a lot of the content decisions that I make are actually behind the scenes being streamlined so that I can have this kind of enormous body of work or output. I'm making my life easier. And I've come to realize that as long as it's, again, meets some quality bar that I have in my head of this is something I'm proud of, then the right people will find it. Right. There's plenty of people who wish that I wrote something else or wrote, 5 out for public or whatever. Those aren't the right people. Right. So I'm not trying to get everybody. I just want to find the right audience, because that right audience will stay with me, for years and years to come. And so that's kind of how I think about it.
Let's talk about the podcast. You have blown it up. You now have one of the 30 biggest business podcasts in the world. What has been the key to success there?
Persistence. When I started, I actually, I didn't even think I was going to start a podcast, really. I kind of, in hindsight, like I recorded a couple of episodes and didn't really know what I was doing. But it was just persistence. It was just over time, grinding it out. Every once in a while, an episode would kind of explode. You'd get some more subscribers. And you can kind of see the baseline of downloads over time just continued to increase. And so it just took time. And if you think about, Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan, all these top podcasts, most of them were started, 7+ years ago, 10 years ago. And again, they just had time, right? And it took a long time for them to build those audiences. And so I think the same thing with podcasts today. If you're going to start, again, you just got to be super committed to doing it consistently. And it takes time. And so this whole idea of like set frequency and don't miss an episode, you're building trust, right? If you tell people I'm going to do it once a week, and then all of a sudden you don't have an episode for 2 weeks, people are like, well, that's kind of like, why am I subscribed to this? Right? Like, I don't know what to expect. And therefore they move on. Other things here, target guests with large audience, we already talked about. One little hack: every author that's got a new book, they're always looking to promote their work. So if you want to kind of, start the flywheel of getting good guests, go find people who are coming out with books and then get them to come on your podcast because they want to promote their books. Recording via Zoom, you get audio and video. So it allows you then to cut it later, like we talked about, and publish on different platforms. Good microphone and good lighting. A lot of people kind of overlook this in the beginning. I used to think it wasn't important until you then use a good microphone and good lighting, and then you realize how important it actually is. So just focus on that in the beginning. You can use micro content to promote individual episodes. So I'm an investor in a company called Shuffle. They basically let you pull kind of 60-second clips out of a podcast, and then you can tweet them. And it's got kind of a cool visual that goes with it, whatever. That's a great way to kind of tease an episode or tell people, hey, listen to this 1 60-second clip. If you thought this was interesting, go listen to the full episode here. That's super interesting. And then transcripts and show notes. I did this for a while. It's really hard to do when you're cranking out one a day. The transcripts take a long time, and the show notes can be really tedious if you do it right. But if you're pumping out content in a less frequent model, so let's say once a week, for example, transcripts and show notes, one, not only are great for the audience because they can use them to learn and get the content, but also two, is if you publish them somewhere publicly, they're fantastic for SEO. So you can imagine if you record an episode with somebody, talk about 10 topics, you're just increasing the surface area of SEO to drive traffic to that episode. So I highly suggest that if it makes sense from a frequency standpoint. But if you're going to do, an episode a day, it gets to be pretty difficult.
Yeah, quick comment on the book idea. Then I have a question for you. So yesterday I got to interview Seth Godin, and I was on Amazon last week, and I was just sort of looking around, and like whenever I pass a bookstore, I walk in, I spend a lot of time on Amazon just sort of like scrolling the new books. So I've like my sense of like what's new, what's coming out is like very attuned just to figure out like what are people interested in. And I saw on Amazon November like 17th or something, Seth Godin is coming out with a new book. So I immediately emailed Seth Godin and I said, hi, Seth, I would like to be the very first person to interview you for your new book. He responded and said, you are the very first person to ask me about the new book interview. I'd love to do it. How about a time next week? And we'll hold the podcast until November. So that's exactly what we did. And it's the same sort of thing. Then I was talking to another big author this week. Same thing. He said, you know what? The book is coming out in December. Let's table the podcast until then, and then we can do it. So I've been thinking about how to get bigger and bigger guests. And this book thing is definitely a big opportunity for growth. Question for you, Pomp. How do you think about different revenue splits between each section? So you say Twitter is the hub, but you don't make money from Twitter. So how do you think about revenue and actually turning this into a full-on business model?
Yeah. In the ideal world, I would never deal with an advertiser. I've thought a ton of times about just making everything subscriber based. As of right now, there's advertising that goes on in the podcast, but I don't even have advertising turned on YouTube, for example, because I was growing so much. For me, it's one of these things where like this really was kind of a side thing. And so I wanted it to be profitable, but I wasn't sitting there trying to squeak out every last dollar. And over time, what I realized is as I created more and more value for people, they were happy to pay. Like literally people would send me emails and be like, I cannot believe that I get that email every single day and it's so cheap. Like you're underselling me. And I was like, well, should I like increase the price? You know what I mean? Like you start to think like, oh wait, maybe I'm like underestimating this. But then you realize like there's non-economic benefits as well. So for example, I want as big of an audience as possible on the email. So I'll actually keep the price low. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll even discount, right? So, I think the actual stated price of the newsletter is $30 a month and $300 a year. But pretty much everyone has signed up at $10 because I just keep a discount running almost, all the time. Right. And so why do I do that? It's because I don't want to just optimize for as much money as possible. I'm actually optimizing for kind of this balance between revenue and having the largest audience that I can have. Right. And that equilibrium is really important.
And also there's a sort of Jason Calacanis, Tim Ferriss model where angel investing actually becomes the thing that's profitable. I think both of them invested in Uber, and that then became something that was an opportunity for them. And you see the same thing happening throughout the Silicon Valley ecosystem where people build audiences, then they become angel investors. I invest in companies in education, in productivity, and at the intersection of sort of creator monetization. So that has been really helpful for me. And likewise for you, you're making angel investments. And then like Rahul Vora just raised, the founder of Superhuman, just raised a $7 million fund. And it's based on turning an audience into investments. So I think that what you just said there is very important, that there's a lot of different ways that you can get paid, and money is just one of them. You can get paid in access. You can get paid in influence. You can get paid in being able to have amazing conversations like this. Like, how lucky am I? I basically get to have this conversation with you and ask every single question that I have. And that is another way that I'm paid. So for all of you, I think that like one of the things to think about, like even look at a lot of media moguls like Rupert Murdoch, who of course owns Fox News and is a big media mogul in Australia. He is basically getting paid in influence and the ability for his ideas to take hold in the real world and not just what he's making money with. You could see Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. That is making money in influence. And so what you're seeing is what media does, it's never been the best business. Sorry, Pomp, you're not going to build the next Fortune 100 company doing this. But what you do see is people who have that then get into exactly what Pomp already has. And I think that's really interesting to consider as you think about what it means to run a media business and the benefits of having an audience.
Couldn't agree more.
There we go. So
I'm dead serious with this slide. People will laugh, but I'm dead serious. People will underestimate how much time this takes and how long you've got to work on it. But I continue to say it, like, only try it if you're willing to put the time in. Because if you're willing to put the time in, it can be super valuable. But if you're just gonna try it sometimes or do it one day a week or anything like that, you're end up not only one, not being successful with it, two, you're going to get frustrated because it's not growing and you don't have an audience. So I think you just got to kind of have a introspective look of, does it actually make sense for me to do this? Do I have the time to dedicate to it? And if I do, then get started.
I have two more questions for you. So the first is, where do you see this going? Like in 10 years, what do you want to have?
So I'm pretty open about this. All of the distribution and audience stuff is just a gateway drug. I understand that the way businesses are going to get it built in the future is they will actually build the customer base first, and then they will build the products to sell to those customers. I make no qualms about it. That's exactly what I'm doing. I am building out massive customer bases, and we're already working on a couple of different products that we will then sell through to the audience. but they're things that we already know have product market fit, right? We're not worried about going and finding the audience. And so that's kind of the idea here of what we're building.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I'm so focused on rite of passage. So I have this idea called audience first products that in the 20th century, if you took something like Tide, right? Tide laundry detergent, what did they do? They went out and somebody had an idea, some inventor said, I am going to come out and build Tide laundry detergent. Okay, we now have the product. What do? Well, we have to go build an audience. So let's go on television. Let's go in newspapers, magazines. Let's do the marketing. Now we're seeing this inversion, and this has to do with the internet because power on the internet and economic power flows to people not who control supply, but people who control demand. And so what that means is the person who has the relationship with the customer wins, first of all. Second of all, when it comes to the businesses that Pomp and I run, where we both have one full-time employee working for us, what you end up seeing is if you can control the relationship with your customer, guess what? You don't have to pay advertising costs. You can skirt around Facebook and Google. Get this, roughly 40 cents of every dollar raised for venture capital goes to Facebook and Google paid advertising. What's happened for me with Rite of Passage is the entire business has grown without a single cent of paid marketing. I've never run an ad, none of that. What I do is I try to create great stuff, build trust with my audience, and then end up launching products. So how am I thinking about this? I am building the audience first. Then this is what's so great about writing online. When you write, you learn all about an industry. When you write, you then get feedback from your audience saying, hey, this is what I want. This is where I'm struggling. You go solve their problem. And the second that your product launches, guess what? You don't have to pay for advertising. And so where Pomp and I really come together here is this idea of audience first product. Go build the audience, go write online, go start sharing your ideas, learn in public, be prolific in doing so. What I focus on in Rite of Passage, build that up, and then you can start building your business.
Completely agree. I think you nailed it. That's the whole game.
Pomp, this was the best 70 minutes of audience building education in the entire country this year. There won't be a university, there won't be a podcast that did better than this. And thank you so much for being so detailed. This was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, look, thanks for having me. I appreciate all the help in getting this set up and doing it.
Thanks for coming today. Bye, everybody.